I stood in the freezing shadows of my parents' porch at exactly 7 a.m. on January 2nd, watching through the frosted glass as my mother's hand reached for the cream-colored box I had left behind. I knew exactly what was inside. I knew the weight of every document, the sharpness of every signature, and the exact moment the air would leave her lungs. To the world, I was Elena Vance, the dependable daughter, the quiet operator, the one who stayed late so everyone else could leave early. But to my family, I was nothing. And in exactly 60 seconds, they were about to find out how expensive nothing truly is. 48 hours earlier, the world looked perfect. My parents' estate in Connecticut was a masterclass in holiday artifice. The chandelier light caught the crystal stemware, the scent of pine and expensive bourbon filled the air, and my brother Julian was holding court at the head of the table. Julian, 31, with a smile that worked better than his brain, and a title, Vice President of Operations, that I had practically written the job description for. Dinner had barely started when the gifts came out. This was the Vance family ritual, a public display of hierarchy disguised as generosity. My mother, Patricia, handled the boxes like she was distributing medals of honor. One for my father, a vintage watch to match his ego. One for Julian, a set of keys to a new luxury SUV and a promotion that hadn't been earned. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, watching the room glow with their shared success. I didn't expect a car. I didn't even expect a promotion. I expected a seat at the table I had spent the last decade building. Then, Patricia picked up the final box, a long, cream-colored package with a silk ribbon. She looked straight at me, her eyes devoid of the warmth she'd just showered on Julian. She didn't slow down. She slid the box past my plate, the silk ribbon brushing against my sleeve, and placed it directly into Julian's waiting hands. I looked at her, waiting for the correction. "Mom?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't blink. She took a sip of her wine, adjusted her pearls, and spoke with the casual cruelty of someone commenting on the weather. "There's nothing for someone who contributes nothing, Elena. We have to be realistic about who is carrying the weight of this family's future." My father, Daniel, didn't even look up from his steak. "We tolerate your presence, Elena. That should be enough of a gift." Julian laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the clinking of silverware. "You're the background noise, sis. Don't get confused about your place in the soundtrack." In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a crack. It was a crystallization. The heat of humiliation vanished, replaced by a cold, mathematical clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply pushed my chair back, the sound of wood scraping against marble echoing like a gunshot. I stood up, put on my coat, and walked out of that house without saying a single word. Silence is only a weakness if you don't know how to use it as a weapon. As I drove back to my apartment through the snow, the words "contributes nothing" played on a loop, synced to the rhythm of my windshield wipers. People think humiliation is a loud, explosive event. It's not. It's a quiet accumulation of being erased. For 20 years, I had been the ghost in the machine of Vance shipping and logistics. When the port strikes hit in 2021 and our entire supply chain was paralyzed, it wasn't Julian who spent 72 hours on the phone with union reps and customs brokers. It was me. When the Series B funding was nearly pulled because my father had mismanaged the debt-to-equity ratio, it wasn't Daniel who stayed up until dawn, rebuilding the financial models to satisfy the auditors. It was me. I was the one who knew that our biggest client, the Miller Group, was planning to leave because Julian had missed 3 consecutive quarterly reviews. I was the one who flew to Chicago on my own dime, sat in a lobby for 6 hours, and renegotiated a 3-year exclusivity contract that saved 40% of our annual revenue. I did the work, and I let them take the credit because I thought loyalty was a currency that would eventually be cashed in for love. I was wrong. In a family that only values what it can use, loyalty is just a license for further exploitation. By 2 a.m. on January 1st, my apartment floor was a sea of binders. I had every record, every emergency cash transfer I had made from my personal savings to cover payroll when the company accounts were frozen, Every signature my father had forgotten to authorize. Every unauthorized expense Julian had charged to the company credit card for his client networking at high-stakes casinos. I looked at the rows of binders, contracts, ledgers, compliance reports, and I realized that the Vance empire wasn't built on my father's vision or Julian's charisma. It was built on my silence. If the nothing walks away, the everything collapses. At 10 a.m., I met Sarah Brooks. Sarah was a shark in a tailored suit, a friend from college who specialized in corporate litigation and had spent years telling me I was being robbed. We sat in a fogged-up corner of a cafe, the smell of espresso steam thick in the air. I didn't tell her I was hurt. I told her I was resigning. I laid out the numbers. Sarah listened, her pen scratching against a legal pad with surgical precision. When I finished, she didn't offer a hug. She leaned forward and said, "Elena, you've been acting like a martyr, but you're actually a creditor. They don't just owe you an apology. They owe you 31 months of reimbursed advances, 3 years of deferred salary, and a 15% minority equity stake that your grandfather left you in a trust that your father never finalized." "What do they lose if I stop?" I asked. Sarah smiled, and it was the most beautiful, dangerous thing I had ever seen. Within 48 hours, they lose their operational brain. Within a week, they lose their bank's confidence. Within a month, they lose the company. You aren't just leaving, Elena. You are pulling the foundation out from under a house that forgot it was standing on you. I spent the rest of New Year's Day building The Box. It was a masterpiece of professional destruction. Inside, I placed my master keys and company ID, the physical tethers to my servitude. Beneath them, I layered the documents. My formal resignation, effective immediately, a notarized demand for the reimbursement of $450,000 in personal funds used for company operations, and a notice of intent to enforce my equity rights. But the real poison pill was the USB drive at the bottom. It contained the digital trail of every mess I had ever cleaned up. It wasn't blackmail, it was a mirror. It held the evidence of Julian's incompetence and my father's negligence, organized with the same meticulous care I had used to keep them afloat. Around midnight, my phone buzzed, a message in the family group chat. A photo of the luxury watch Julian had been given at dinner. The caption, "Hard work pays off. Sorry you couldn't make the cut, Elena." My mother had liked the photo. My father had commented with a trophy emoji. I didn't reply. I just scheduled the emails. At 9 a.m. the next day, 3 of our largest clients would receive a polite, professional notice that I was no longer their point of contact. The bank would receive a notification that I was withdrawing my status as an emergency guarantor on the company's short-term credit lines. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being mathematical. They said I contributed nothing. Fine. Let's see what happens when nothing is gone. That brings us back to the porch. 7 a.m. My mother, Patricia, finally opened the door. She was wearing a silk robe, her face still soft from sleep, her mind likely occupied with the brunch she was planning for her successful son. She saw the box. She frowned, thinking perhaps it was a late gift, a gesture of my apology for walking out. She lifted the lid. She saw the keys. She saw the top letter. The sound she made wasn't human. It was a sharp, high-pitched intake of breath, followed by a scream that shattered the morning silence. My father appeared behind her, his face contorted in irritation. He snatched the papers, his eyes scanning the reimbursement totals and the bank notification. I watched from the shadows as the color drained from his face. His hands, the hands that had dismissed me so easily 2 nights ago, began to shake. Julian came down last, yawning, reaching for a coffee he would never get to finish. They didn't see me. They didn't see the woman who had spent a decade being their safety net. They only saw the void where that net used to be. My phone began to vibrate in my pocket. Call 1, call 2, call 3. The nothing was finally being heard, but I wasn't going to answer. Not yet, because the true cost of their arrogance was only just beginning to accumulate. By 10 a.m. on January 2nd, the silence in my apartment was a stark contrast to the earthquake I had just triggered at Vance Shipping and Logistics. Most people think revenge is a hot, impulsive act, a slammed door, a shattered glass. But real power, the kind that changes the trajectory of a life, is cold. It is mathematical. It is the simple removal of a variable that everyone else took for granted. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of me, and watched the digital dominoes fall. I didn't have to do anything else. The system I had spent 10 years maintaining was doing the work for me. You see, a company is like a human body. My father was the face, Julian was the expensive suit, but I was the nervous system, and I had just disconnected the brain. The first tremor hit at 10:15 a.m. My personal email, the one I had used to communicate with our vendors for years, pinged. It was Sandra, the company controller. Her message was frantic. "Elena, where is the master authorization file for the Q1 payroll? Daniel is screaming that you changed the encryption keys. We have 150 warehouse workers who won't get paid by noon if we don't upload the file now." I didn't reply. I had warned my father in September that the security protocols were outdated. I had sent 3 memos suggesting a dual auth system. He had ignored them all because paperwork slows down growth. Now, that lack of paperwork was about to freeze his operations. Then came the call I knew was inevitable, not from my family but from Marcus Thorne, our relationship manager at the bank. Marcus was a man who spoke in interest rates and risk assessments. And he didn't care about family loyalty, he cared about stability. "Elena," he said, his voice clipped, "I just received your formal withdrawal as emergency guarantor on the revolving credit line. Is there something I should know?" "I've resigned, Marcus," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's. "I'm no longer authorized to provide verbal assurances for the company's short-term liabilities." There was a long silence. I could almost hear him looking at the Vance accounts on his screen. "Without your personal guarantee, Elena, the covenant review is triggered automatically. The interest rate on the $5 million loan jumps 4% effective immediately. Does Daniel know this?" "Daniel is the CEO, Marcus. I assume he's read the contracts I negotiated for him." I hung up. That was the first mathematical consequence. In 5 minutes. And I had just added $200,000 to my father's annual overhead, and I hadn't even finished my coffee. By noon, the nothing they had dismissed at dinner was becoming a very loud everything. My phone was a graveyard of missed calls. Call 12, my mother. "Elena, pick up. This is ridiculous. Your father is having a chest pain. You're killing him over a box? Come home and fix this portal access right now." Note the phrasing, "fix this." Even in her panic, she didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a tool that was malfunctioning. Call 15. My father. His voice had lost its boom. The master of the house was gone, replaced by a man realizing he didn't know his own company's login credentials. "Elena, let's not be hasty. I'll admit the New Year's dinner was insensitive, but we are a family. We don't do things this way. Bring the codes over, and we can discuss your reimbursement. I'll even look at the equity papers." He was still trying to negotiate from a position of power he no longer held. He was offering to look at things that were already legally mine. Call 18, Julian. This was the one I enjoyed most. He wasn't arrogant anymore. He sounded like a child who had realized the floor was actually lava. "Elena, please. The Miller Group is on line 1. They're asking about the January port schedule, and I don't know what they're talking about. They're threatening to pull the contract. Just tell me what to say." I put the phone face down. Julian had spent years telling me I was background noise. Well, background noise is what you miss most when the room goes pitch black. I waited until 7:30 p.m. I wanted the fear to marinate. I wanted them to spend a full day realizing exactly how much they didn't know. When I pulled into the driveway of the Connecticut estate, the house looked different. The Christmas lights were still blinking, but they looked like a distress signal now. I walked in without knocking. I still had my key, though it would be the last time I used it. The dining room was no longer a stage for a perfect holiday memory. It looked like a war room. Papers were scattered everywhere. Laptops were open. My father looked 10 years older, my mother was clutching a tissue, and Julian was staring at a spreadsheet like it was a foreign language. The box I had left on the porch sat in the center of the table, wide open. "You're late," my father snapped. It was a reflex, a ghost of his old authority. "I'm on time for the person I am now," I said, taking a seat at the far end of the table. "An equal, an investor, and your largest creditor." My mother started to sob. "How could you do this, Elena? To your own brother? To your father's legacy? All because of a gift box?" "It wasn't about the box, Patricia," I said, using her first name for the first time. The flinch she gave was worth a decade of silence. "The box was just the moment I stopped lying to myself. I built this company. I saved it in 2018 when the bank tried to foreclose. I saved it again in 2021. And while I was doing that, you were busy deciding which silk ribbon to use to exclude me. We were going to give you your share eventually," my father lied. "Eventually is a word for people who don't have receipts, Daniel. I have receipts. I have every wire transfer I made from my savings to keep your payroll alive. I have the trust documents grandfather signed that you lost in a drawer. And I have the logs of Julian's gambling debts being paid out of the operating account." Julian jumped up. "That's private. You can't use that." "I'm not using it," I said, leaning forward. "I'm disclosing it. There's a difference. If I'm a shareholder, I have a fiduciary duty to ensure the company isn't being looted by its vice president." The air in the room was heavy. This was the moment the hierarchy died. I pulled 2 folders from my bag. "Here are the terms," I said. "Option A, you sign the equity transfer today. You reimburse my $450,000 in monthly installments over the next year, and you hire an outside COO, someone I approve of, to actually run this company. If you do this, I step away quietly. I keep the clients from leaving, and I don't file the misconduct reports with the auditors." My father's eyes narrowed. "And option B?" "Option B?" I walk out that door. The Miller Group cancels their contract tomorrow morning. Marcus Thorne at the bank calls in the loan because of the covenant breach, and my lawyer files a lawsuit for equity theft and corporate fraud. By next Christmas, you won't be sitting in this house. You'll be sitting in a courtroom. "You wouldn't," my mother whispered. "Try me," I said. "You told me I contribute nothing. If I'm nothing, then my absence shouldn't cost you a dime, right?" For 3 minutes, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My father looked at Julian, the son he had bet everything on, and saw the truth. Julian was a hollow shell. He couldn't fix the portal. He couldn't keep the clients. He couldn't even read the balance sheet. Daniel Vance picked up the pen. His hand was shaking, but he signed. Patricia watched in horror as the dependable daughter dismantled their world with a few strokes of ink. I left the house 5 minutes later. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't ask for a hug. I didn't need their validation anymore because I had something better, my own. That spring, while the outside consultant was still trying to untangle the mess Julian had made, I opened the doors to Vance Advisory Group. My first 3 clients? The Miller Group and 2 other shipping giants who had followed me the moment they realized the brain of the operation had moved. I sat in my new office, 40 floors above the city, looking at a single item on my desk, a fountain pen. It was the only gift I had ever given myself that mattered. People ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to my family. The company survived, though it's much smaller now. My parents live in a modest condo, and Julian is finally working a job where no one cares about his last name. My answer is always the same. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped holding them up. So before we end today, I have a question for you. Who is the invisible architect in your life? Is it you? Are you the one holding up a structure that doesn't even acknowledge your name? If you are, remember this. The moment you walk away, you don't just leave a void. You reclaim your power. Where are you watching this from? Have you ever had to choose between your family and your dignity? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading every single one. Because this story, it's just the beginning.